It's 10 past, so officially 4 o'clock Toronto time. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 2023 Donor Appreciation Lecture, the first of what I hope will become a new tradition. And in fact, the tradition was supposed to begin last year, but like so many things, it was postponed due to COVID. So it's a double pleasure to be able to welcome you all here today. I didn't fully realize until I became chair how important the generosity of our donors is for everything we do in this department. The most obvious and significant impact is probably on our graduate programs. We in the Department of Classics strive to support our graduate students to the highest degree possible, but it's very hard to keep up with the ever-rising cost of living in Toronto, and we face steep competition from our peer institutions in Canada and the US, including the University of Chicago. Your donations help us to recruit the best students in the world and to support them throughout their studies. They also enable us to recognize and reward students who are particularly excelling in those studies. An award like the Catherine Bosher Memorial Graduate Award in Classics offers targeted support to female students following in Catherine Bosher's footsteps doing innovative interdisciplinary work in classics, while the John London Memorial Fellowship in Classics, established in 2019 in memory of MA alumnus and University of Turin professor John London, supports students undertaking extended travel for advanced research. At the undergraduate level, awards like the Chow Champ Scholarship in Classics or the new John Spina Classics Scholarships allowed us to recognize particularly talented undergraduates, which in turn holds out a model and goal for their classmates. The strength of our graduate and undergraduate programs is vital to everything we do, and we literally could not do it without the support of donors like you. I've named some awards made possible by major donations, but our students benefit from donations of every size and shape. And sometimes they're it's shaped like money and checks. Sometimes it's shaped like books. I can mention here the recent donation of books to the Woodbury Library by John Alton and Alison Woodbury, for which we're greatly appreciative. Donations to our departmental trust, for instance, support our efforts to make classics more inclusive through bursaries to our summer Greek and Latin study programs, and they support outstanding students from groups still underrepresented in classics. I know some of you have earmarked your donations for this goal, and I'm happy to report that we're about to welcome into the MA program this fall a truly superb student who was able to learn Greek thanks to the summer language bursary. So in students like this one, we see very clearly the direct positive impact your donations have, both on individuals and on the department as a whole. The event today, as I said, the first of many, I hope, is just a small expression of the department's deep appreciation. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Kenneth Yu, to introduce today's speaker.
It's great to see everyone. It's my immense pleasure to introduce Christopher Ferroni, the Edward Olson Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago. A prolific scholar, Chris has published 7 monographs, over 70 articles in top-tier peer-reviewed journals, and 60 contributions to edited volumes and collections. And he has co-edited 10 volumes on such topics as ancient sacrifice, initiation, and the god Dionysus. His primary interests are in ancient Greek poetry and Greek religion and magic, and many of his publications remain at the foundation of the field. I'll just read to you some titles of his books to convey the breadth of his research. The Stanzaic Architecture of Archaic Greek Elegy, published by Oxford in 2008, The Transformation of Greek Amulets in Roman Imperial Times, University of Pennsylvania Press, 2018, and The Pioneering Ancient Greek Love Magic, published by Harvard in 1999, which has been translated into modern Greek and French. In this book, Ferroni demonstrated that ancient Greek love magic, far from being superstition to be ignored, can serve as windows into Greek ideas about gender and ancient religious agency. Most recently, he and his colleague Sophia Torales-Tovar published 3 volumes entitled Greco-Egyptian Magical Formularies, 2 of which were published last year and another forthcoming from the University of California Press. These are new editions of corpora of magical papyri, and they're significant updates on the influential editions of Karl Preissendunz from a century ago. A red thread in all of Faroni's work is his interdisciplinary outlook, his sophisticated handling of texts, material culture, and iconography to answer complex questions about ancient Greek society. Faroni's research has been supported by the most distinguished awards and fellowships in the humanities, including from the Loeb Foundation, the Institutes of Advanced Study in Princeton and in Paris, the Getty in Los Angeles, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Guggenheim Fellowships. Finally, as a former student of Chris's, I would be remiss not to mention that he is an exceptional teacher. He has the rare ability to maintain constant pressure on students and to keep dissertations moving along without ever making one feel rushed or behind. His personal warmth and amiability ease the times of stress and uncertainty inevitable in graduate studies. In recognition for his exemplary mentorship, Chris received the coveted University of Chicago Award for Excellence in Graduate Teaching in 2008. Chris will speak to us today on Cleitic hymns from Sappho to the PGM. The passages included in the handout, which has been circulated, promise to showcase the vast range of expertise for which Chris is known: lyric poetry, Greek drama, Orphic hymns, Greco-Egyptian magical recipes, Hellenistic spells, and early Christian polemical texts. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Chris Faroni.
Thanks, Kenny, for that introduction. I should just say that though I purposely put the word Cleitic in the title because it is a word that has dropped out of vocabulary. It's a word I learned in graduate school from Michael Jameson in the 1980s, and it's an important type of hymn. It's a hymn, as you see, it's a hymn that calls the God to come to a place, often calling the God from another place. So let me just start. Oh, I also want to thank the department, thank everyone for having me here, and let me go. I have written on top of the first 3 pages to speak slowly because I'm a native New Yorker, and when I get excited about my material, I speak too quickly, so I will hit pause. As the name suggests, the Cleitic hymn is a specialized form of ancient Greek hymn designed to call or to summon a deity from afar to a temple or an altar, as we can see in this fragment of Sappho, which seems to be one of the early. So the handout is just for those of you who want the Greek text. Most of the English translations of what the part I'm talking about is here. So if you're not worried about the Greek text, you can just follow along for most of it, except toward the end. I will alert you. This fragment of Sappho, which seems to be one of the earliest witnesses to the genre. Hither to me, from Crete to this holy temple, where in your delightful grove of apple trees and altars smoking with incense. Then, after describing the attractions of the sanctuary in great detail, Sappho ends her poem with a description of the anticipated theophany. Here, indeed, may you, Kypris, take and pour gracefully into golden cups nectar that is mingled with festivities. Sappho, in short, calls a goddess away from Crete to join some ongoing ritual at a sanctuary on Lesbos that involves the burning of incense. Although the final stanza is somewhat damaged, we can see that at the end of the poem, Sappho does not make any specific requests to the goddess beyond asking her to appear. And despite the fact that the performance is set in the sanctuary, this is clearly a private hymn. Sappho says, "Come to me, not come to us." This hymn is, of course, a literary hymn rather than a cultic one or one used in ritual, but as commentators have pointed out, Sappho seems to reflect in this poem, and in her more famous fragment 1, the traditional form of a Greek hymn. In what follows, I will push this approach a bit further and claim that Sappho's model here is the specific subgenre of a Cleitic hymn. which is, as we shall see, often a personal, not communal speech act. It asks the deity to come, but often does not ask why. And 3 is often key to some kind of crisis that needs immediate attention. The alleged differences between a ritual hymn and a literary hymn has, in fact, also complicated the modern understanding of the so-called Orphic hymns, which survive in the same manuscript as the so-called Homeric hymns and those hymns of Callimachus and Proclus. The first hymn in this collection is dedicated to Hecate, and it displays most of the features of a Cleitic hymn, I call on you, lovely Hecate, at the roadside, at the triple crossroads, in the sky, in the earth and in the sea, saffron cloaked, in the tomb, reveling with the souls of the dead, daughter of Perses, lover of deserted places, delighting in deer, nocturnal, dog-loving, irresistible queen, bull-herder, key-holding mistress of the entire cosmos, leader, nymph, nurturer of youth, mountain roamer, as I beseech you, maiden, to come near to these holy rites, with goodwill always for the cowherd, and always with joyous heart. This short 9-verse poem is a single sentence that comprised mainly of compound epithets and alternate names of the goddess. It delays the request for the deity's appearance until the penultimate line, where the goddess is simply asked to be near the holy rites to be performed in her honor. This hymn to Hecate is similar to Sappho's poem in that it begins and ends with a request to appear. Sappho's hymn focuses on the beauty and the attractiveness of the sanctuary to lure Aphrodite from Crete, whereas the Orphic hymn emphasizes a detailed knowledge of Hecate's names and epithets in the hopes that one or more will have the desired effect. Many scholars, in fact, see the Orphic hymns as literary productions, like those of Sappho, that would have never been used in cult, but in the last 10 or 15 years, there's a growing consensus built upon the work of Jacotet, Fritz Graf, and Morand, that they were performed in the 3rd century in the context of a private initiation rituals associated with the community of Dionysiac worshippers in Asia Minor. This consensus has not, however, addressed 2 features of the hymn, which for so long have convinced scholars to see them as literary poems. The first is that the hymns lack a central narrative or argument that convinces the god to act, and the second is that they do not end with a specific or concrete request. We will see in what follows that Cleitic hymns often lack both, and I will argue that the shared form of the Sapphic and Orphic hymns points to a traditional and underappreciated genre of Cleitic hymn as an introduction to, or first step in, a longer ritual sequence that begins by burning incense and inviting the deity to come to a sanctuary or home, and then in a prosaic prayer or request that follows, to ask the deity for some personal or private benefit. The Cleitic hymn, in short, is designed to produce a theophany, after which the god or goddess is available for further and more detailed requests. To make this argument, I will show that another set of Cleitic hymns, of Roman date like the Orphic ones and of similar form and function, have been missing from the discussion of Cleitic hymns because of the traditional divide between those who study ancient Greek religion and those who study ancient Greek magic. The first are the so-called magical hymns that appear on a lead tablet and in several papyrus handbooks from the 3rd or 4th century CE Egypt. And the second are a pair of important but completely neglected hymns preserved by Hippolytus of Rome in his famous diatribe against the magicians, a text that is usually dated to the 3rd century CE. I will begin, however, by looking at the basic rhetorical form of some other early Cleitic performances. In each case, we will see that these Cleitic hymns have finished their work when the deity arrives, and that a second ritual action or speech act is necessary in order for practitioners to achieve their ultimate goal. Before I begin, let me clarify 2 terms. First of all, you should imagine that you should imagine that there are scare quotes around the problematic terms Orphic and magic every time I use them. The designation Orphic descends from antiquity in the title of a hymn collection claiming to be the work of Orpheus, but in fact these hymns do not seem to have be part of any known corpus of Orpheus' poetry, nor are they connected to Orphic religion, if such a thing ever existed. The second designation, magical hymn, is on the other hand a completely modern invention used to designate the verse sections of invocations found in Greek magical texts. Let me begin by returning to Sappho and examining her other surviving hymn, Fragment 1, which starts out as you all know, ornate throned immortal Aphrodite, wild weaving daughter of Zeus, I entreat you, do not overpower my heart, mistress, with hate and anguish, but come here if ever in the past you heard my voice from afar, and acquiesced and came, leaving your father's golden house with chariot, yoked, beautiful swift sparrows. This poem begins with a plea to come to the performer, coupled in this case with a brief argument. Come to me because you have come before. The request is a personal one and is generated by a crisis that involves anguish and pain. The poem ends by reiterating the Cleidic request, but here too Sappho does not say out loud why she is summoning the goddess. Come to me even now and free me from oppressive anxieties, and bring to perfection however many things my heart longs to perfect, and you yourself be my fellow fighter. We should note that this final request is also a general one, relieve my anxiety and bring about my wishes. We know, of course, from the intervening stanzas that Sappho wants Aphrodite's help in attracting another woman, because in the midsection of the poem, Sappho recalls an earlier theophany of the smiling goddess who promised the poet that whoever was fleeing her would quickly pursue her. In Aeschylus's Eumenides, and in quite different circumstances, Orestes also makes a Cleidic request in a time of crisis, when he prays to Athena. And now it is time with pure lips that I reverently call Athena, ruler of this land, to come to me as an ally. But whether she is in the region of the land of Libya, close by the stream of her natal river, Triton, or whether she is surveying the plain of Phlegra, like a bold man in command of an army, may she come. A god can hear even from far away, so that she may be my liberator from these troubles. Here again, we find the usual features of the Cleidic hymn. First, like Sappho, she begins by calling on Athena to come and be his ally, and at the end he repeats his plea that the goddess come, justifying it this time by the claim that gods can hear from far away, and thereby arrive as his liberator. Orestes also uses a trope that we will see again in the later Cleidic hymns, when he wonders out loud whether Athena is in the land of Libya, close by the river Triton, or whether she is surveying the plain of Phlegra. Orestes' prayer is in fact successful. Athena responds with a theophany and says, "From far away I heard a cry summoning me, by rushing with unwearied foot I have arrived." In his initial prayer, however, Orestes does not explain why Athena should feel compelled to come, or what he wishes her to do when she arrives. To reiterate then, the lyric hymns of Sappho and the dramatic prayer of Orestes are all literary productions, but they nicely reveal a basic genre of Cleidic hymn or prayer. They are short invitations of a deity to come to the speaker who is in need of help. Their expressed goal seems to be theophany alone, and for this reason they usually do not end with specific requests, which we presume will come later. Now the Orphic hymns. Anne-Marie Morin has shown that the Orphic hymns of the Cleidic type take a form that can be summarized as follows. I should also say there's a bibliography at the end, so what I mentioned will be in there. According to Morin's analysis, an initial verse that either uses, as Orestes does, a first-person verb to summon a god and the accusative to come, or addresses a god directly in the vocative, as Sappho does, and bids them to listen or to come. Then there's roughly 6 to 11 verses of epithets or short relative clauses, naming and describing the powers or places connected with the deity, and then a closing sentence that often begins with an apostrophe that asks the goddess to come to some subsequent ritual or speech act. In handout 6, you will see that at the end of 4 of these hymns, this is not on the slide, you'll see that 4 of these hymns, the goddess is invited to some kind of mystery celebration. And then in handout 7, I have given you the beginning and the end of 3 more hymns of the Cleidic type. give you a sense of their overall shape. To save time, I will read only the first example, which is here. Hymn to Protagonos, the incense is myrrh. I call upon Protagonos, the two-natured, the great, the other tossed. Then there follows 8 lines of epithets or alternate names, and then the last 2 lines, but you, O blessed one of many counsels, of many seeds, come gladly to those who are celebrating a holy, elaborate rite. Like the hymn to Hecate quoted early, all of these are Orphic hymns end with the request to attend some kind of ritual performance. The frequency of these Cletic hymns in the Orphic collection is important. Out of 87 hymns, 28, or roughly 1/3, begin and end by summoning God. The relatively short length of these Cletic hymns is also of note. Of the 28 composed in this fashion, 22 are between 8 and 18 verses long. To get an even better sense of the ritual setting and the introductory nature of these Cletic hymns, we need to look at a set of hymns of similar date preserved in the magical text from Roman Egypt. The first is a lead tablet inscribed with a long erotic curse, and the second is a recipe from a papyrus handbook of a similar kind of procedure. This curse tablet aims at forcing a woman named Gorgonia to have sex with another woman named Sophia, and it includes 2 Cletic hymns, both in iambic meters, not hexametrical. The first one runs as follows. Lord of the immortals, holding the scepters of Tartarus and of terrible Styx and of life-robbing Lethe, the spiky hairs of Kerberos tremble in fear of you. You crack the loud whips of the Erinnoias. The couch of Persephone delights your heart when you go to the desired bed, whether you be immortal Serapis, whom the universe fears, whether you be Osiris, star of the land of Egypt. Your messenger is the all-wise boy, and Anubis is yours, pious herald of the dead. Come hither and fulfill my wishes, because I summon you by these secret symbols. Hades is not named in the short hymn, which is perhaps surprising in a Cletic hymn that's supposed to summon the god by all of his names. But this is explainable because the Greeks were, in fact, often afraid to mention his name aloud. But the hymn makes his identity clear by mentioning the couch of Persephone, the 3 parts of his kingdom, Tartarus, Styx, and Lethe, as well as those who serve under him with fear, Kerberos and the Erinnoias. The first 6 verses of this hymn are indeed filled with references to both the places and key individuals traditionally found in the Greek underworld. In the last 6 lines, however, this same hymn ends by identifying Hades with Serapis and Osiris, and by placing in his service the god Anubis, another well-known denizen of the Egyptian underworld. The differences between these 2 halves of the hymn suggest, in fact, that the last 6 verses were added later in an effort to assimilate this originally Greek Cletic hymn to its new Egyptian context. But in making these Egyptian equations, the author has, nonetheless, adopted a very old feature of Greek Cletic hymns that we noted earlier in Orestes' prayer to Athena, at that point where he wonders aloud whether she's in Libya or whether she is surveying the plain of Phlegon. On the curse tablet, however, this is not a question of location, but rather it's a question of assimilation, whether you be Serapis or whether whom the universe fears, or Osiris, the star of the land of Egypt. The final verse of this hymn explains why the author thinks Hades will accept his invitation. Hades will come because he has been summoned by these secret symbols. The use here of the pronoun these probably refers to the long list of magical names that begins in the very next sentence. But it will not detain us beyond noting that as a list of divine names continues in Cletic tradition by piling up multiple names and epithets. I should say here that these names, we don't know what they are. Most of them, we don't know what they are. Some people say they're nonsense names. I have a feeling, I have an idea that one time I wanted to sit down with my colleagues at the Oriental Institute and see if they have meaning in some other languages. For the last 100 years, scholars have tried to say that most of them are Egyptian or most of them are Jewish, and it hasn't worked out. Some of them are, but I would say 90% of them seem to be unknown as far as we can tell. The third section of this ritual sequence is the curse itself, which is in prose rather than verse, and I'll read it in a second. Constrain Gorgonia, whom Nilogenia bore, to cast herself into the bathhouse for the sake of Sophia, whom Isera bore, and become a bathwoman. I, Lord King of the Platonic gods, burn, set on fire, and flame, the soul, the heart, the liver, the spirit of Gorgonia, whom Nilogenia bore, with love and affection for Sophia, whom Isera bore. Drive Gorgonia herself, torment her body night and day, force her to rush forth from every place and every house, loving Sophia, whom Isera bore, she, Gorgonia, surrendered like a slave, giving herself in all her possessions. So this is the heart of the curse tablet, right? This curse invokes Hades once again as king of the underworld, and the change from poetry to prose shows us clearly that this is a second and subsequent speech act. The Cleatic hymn, in short, uses poetry to attract and invite Hades to come up from the underworld, whereas the curse that follows in prose specifically asks him to burn the target with passion. The switch from poetry to prose, moreover, shows that these are two separate speech acts. We see the same tripart structure in another section of the same lead tablet. The initial hymn is rather corrupt, so I will only discuss the first 6 verses. Fundament of gloomy darkness, jagged-toothed dog, coiled with snakes, churning 3 heads, traveler in the recesses of the underworld, come. Spirit driver with the Erinoi, savage with their stinging whips, holy serpents, maidens, maenads, frightful maidens, come to my wrathful incantation. As was true for the first hymn on the tablet, this one is followed by a shorter sequence of magical names, and then by a prose curse that is quite similar to the one that followed the hymn to Hades that was quoted earlier. Here, too, it would seem that the wrathful incantations mentioned at the end of the hymn refer once again to the prose curses at the very end of the sequence. These 2 hymns on the lead tablet give us an excellent idea of how a Cleatic hymn in a poetic meter can be used as an introduction to a subsequent request that is clearly marked by its prosaic form as a second and separate performance. There is, moreover, evidence in the Greek magical handbook that the initial hymn could also be composed in dactylic hexameters, like the Orphic hymns discussed earlier. In number 10 on the handout, we see an erotic curse with the same 3 parts. Now, I'll only read a few lines from this hymn to save time. The first part of the Cleatic hymn begins, O foam-born Cytherea, mother of both gods and men, ethereal and chthonic, all Mother Nature, unsubdued, who holds things together, who revolves in great fire, and it goes on for several lines. And it ends with, Queen Goddess, come to these incantations. Unlike the Cleatic hymns on the lead tablet, the instructions in this papyrus handbook helpfully describe the simple ritual that accompanies this hymn. It is an offering to the star of Aphrodite, which is probably the planet Venus, all right? A white dove's blood and fat, untreated myrrh, and parched wormwood. Make these together as pills and offer them to the star on pieces of vine wood or on coals. As in the case, so again, it's a very simple offering, just like, if you remember the hymn that Sappho sings to Aphrodite, he speaks of the altar smoked with incense. As in the case of the 2 hymns on the lead curse tablet, this Cleatic hymn is only the first part of the ritual sequence. This is hinted at by the final plea to Aphrodite to come to these incantations. Here, like the reference at the end of the hymn to Hades, to these secret symbols, or the one at the end of the Hecate hymn to my wrathful incantations, the pronoun points forward to the speech act that follows. The sequence that follows, moreover, is similar to the one that we saw on the lead tablet. First, a series of magical names, and then an incantation, this time in verse. Whereas the Cleatic hymn ended by asking the goddess to come to these incantations, the curse itself asked the goddess at the end to bring this incantation to perfection or to fulfillment. Much like the request that Sappho makes to Aphrodite in the final stanza of her hymn, bring to perfection however many things my heart belongs to her friends. The use of incense as the only offering to Aphrodite in this magical recipe provides yet another parallel between the Sapphic, the Orphic, and the magical hymns. Sappho speaks of an altar loaded with burning incense, and the manuscripts that preserve the Orphic hymns, nearly every hymn is introduced with a title that indicates the name of the divine recipient and the recommended incense to burn, usually storax, myrrh, or frankincense, as you can see, for example, in the titles of the first 10 hymns of the collection. In 10 of the roughly 30 magical hymns collected by Preisendens, we are also told to perform this kind of ceremony.